Welcome to this morning's public meeting of the Select Committee of Tynwald on Dyslexia, Dyspraxia and other related services. I'm Rob Callister, MHK, Chair of this committee. With me this morning are Anne Corlett, MHK, and Dawn Kinnish, MLC. This committee was established to consider a petition of redress of grievance which was presented on Tynwald Day last year. Today we're meeting members, the petitioner and members of the Dyslexia Advocacy Group. Before I ask our guests to introduce themselves, can I ask that all mobile phones are on silent or switched off so we don't have any interruptions? For the purpose of Hansard, I'll also be ensuring that only one person is speaking at a time, and please also be aware that this evidence session will be live streamed via Tynwald Live. Welcome to our guests this morning. For the benefit of Hansard and anyone listening, could I please ask you to introduce yourselves and in which capacity you're presenting yourselves today? If we can start with you, Peter, please.
My name is Peter Washington. I'm part of the Dyslexia Advocacy Group, Isle of Man.
Good morning.
And my name's Julia Bell. I'm one of the petitioners, and I created Dyslexia Advocacy Group, Isle of Man.
Okay, thank you.
Hi, I'm Annabel Storm. I'm part of the Dyslexia Advocacy Group.
I'm Renee Caley. I'm part of the Dyslexia Advocacy Group, Isle of Man, and also here as a concerned parent.
Excellent, thank you. Good morning to all. I was wondering if we could start with the petition. I was wondering if you could just briefly explain what led you to present this petition, both in July 2020 and again in July 2024. So I don't know who wants to speak first.
Okay, so I did a petition of redress, back in 2020, and the reason I did that was because schools were not identifying my child as being dyslexic or acknowledging my concerns that my child might be dyslexic. I could see that she was struggling with literacy and across other subjects too. Seeing her well below average. I could see the concerns, in school and out of school as well. And in order to prove that there was a concern, I felt like I had to provide the diagnosis myself, which required funding and taking her off island, which obviously adds to the expense too. And then I had to provide the diagnostic report to the schools for them to then take me seriously. So that led me to do the first petition because schools simply didn't identify my daughter as having dyslexia, despite me as a parent coming into school and saying many, many times, could she be dyslexic, and my concerns being ignored. The second time I did the petition was because although some progress had been made in terms of getting the data, because there were 2 consultations that had been made, which was favourable because we've got the data and promises were made in terms of doing the draft core curriculum framework, I started learning that perhaps this is just a curriculum and not actually how schools are going to help children to access the curriculum. So that was a concern. And also when you read the recommendations from the feedback from the consultation, there were some things on there that I didn't think the desk were delivering on. For example, it says on there that we need to consider specialist intervention, specialist training, and I was being given feedback from a member of staff in desk that this isn't going to happen. And therefore I thought, well, what else might not be happening? And so I decided then that I was going to do another petition, and this time I'd do it differently, because obviously if you do the same thing twice, you expect to get the same result. So I decided to do things differently to try and get a different result, and that's how I ended up getting the public involved so that we could have a greater impact. And obviously that worked. It did have a greater impact.
Okay, excellent, thank you. Anybody else want anything to add? Are you okay? No? Okay, we'll move on. I thought maybe just for myself personally, I was wondering if you could give an insight into the actual group, the Dyslexia Advocacy Group, how it was set up, how it works with the other groups on the Isle of Man, how you all found yourselves to be on that committee. I was wondering if you all could give us an insight into that. We will also pick up your concerns with regard to the consultation later on, but just that as an opening group for myself, question for myself.
Should I speak? Okay.
Yeah, you go first.
Yeah, okay. So Dyslexia Advocacy Group, we meet roughly every fortnight at the family library. They've been very supportive, and they give us that venue free of charge when they normally charge other groups. The purpose of what we started is, I suppose it provides us all with some support. It makes us realise that we're not alone, that other people are there. It gives me encouragement and motivation to keep going week by week in, the various emails and phone calls and letters and so on that I make. And we come up with a plan together. I say that 5 heads is better than 1 head in terms of problem solving and coming up with ideas. I would definitely say that I wouldn't have been as successful if I was completely on my own. Every single member in this group has given some really good advice. And between us, we have sometimes distributed that work out, which just means we've actually been able to get more done between us because we've shared the workload.
We've come across a lot of individuals who have had similar concerns and struggles and whatnot. So, from time to time, people are dropping in. We sort of provide that sort of service for people to come and sort of let us know where they're at. I think Julia, as Julia said, there's an awful lot of people out there who are struggling, can't get the answers that they need or don't know where to go. And I suppose collectively we've just come together because we've all had the same concerns. And this has provided an avenue. And it gives more weight as well. And with different expertise within the group, we're able to sort of, work more collaboratively.
I'm very late to the group. I wasn't even aware that it existed until you were looking for feedback to present to Tynwald. And it went on the mainstream pages, the normal Isle of Man large pages on Facebook, and that was the only time I saw it. I wasn't aware of this, but I'm facing exactly the same struggles that they were facing. So I've joined from that perspective. There are loads of us out there, but if we don't know that there are people pulling together to try and get this in front of Tynwald, then we're missing those voices.
I think for me, again, I found the group by accident, but I can go back as far as 2003 when I started a very similar campaign, and I had a group of people together, and we were doing a very similar campaign to try to raise awareness on dyslexia. I've got a brief history lesson that started in 2003 with one of my children. The reason that I'm involved now is, from what I can see, is nothing has changed. And I think for me to start something in 2003, have my children go through the education system, they've now left, I can give a completely different insight to what these parents are facing, because there seems to be a policy for the department, if you just wait long enough, your problem goes away. And it's bringing that context into it, that this isn't an unforeseen something that's just happening. There is a legacy issue here that is being perpetrated even now. So my view is to bring longevity, to say that this isn't something that's just happened in the last couple of years. This has been going on for a lot of years.
Okay, thank you, Peter. Dawn, did you want to come in?
Yeah, I just wanted to ask, are you all members of that organisation as parents of children who've got dyslexia, dysgraphia, dyspraxia or dyscalculia? Or are there other people who are part of your group who are not parents but bringing something of value to your group?
Yes. So we have certainly one very valuable member who helps us enormously, who does not have any children with additional educational needs, yet she's very passionate about inclusivity and equality, and therefore she helps us based on the principles of having a fair and justice kind of education system. Yeah.
And have you had any teachers or teaching assistants involved in your group?
We have had a few teachers who have come down in the very early stages just to see what we're all about. But other than that, by and large, we haven't had a lot of interaction at all with teachers. I have contacted schools via emails to kind of keep a universal email to go out to let the schools know what we're doing. For example, when the select committee came out, I sent a universal email to all the schools just to say there is an opportunity for teachers to come forward with evidence to the select committee should you wish. I hope this can be seen as supporting teachers as much as the children, as much as the families. We're doing this for all three of us because we know that there will be so many teachers out there who want to deliver better education, but there'll be barriers, and it's as much to supporting teachers as it is us and our children. But unfortunately, we haven't had a very high response at all, or favourable response at all from teachers.
And we do have
or schools.
we do have input from highly qualified professionals. within the education system who have specialties in this area as well, who contribute to the group.
Okay.
I think we've got to look at the demographics of what the people that we are advocating for, this group. Because of the way that this is being run within the Department of Education, there are an awful lot of dyslexic children out there who don't know they're dyslexic. When you find a child with dyslexia, quite often you'll find a parent with it, and quite often those parents don't know that they've got dyslexia. So there's a huge amount of people out there, when we're talking about this, think it's not for them. They just think that they're, because of their educational background and what's happened to them, they're just thinking stupid. And that's a crime as far as I'm concerned, that we've got people like that. They do not want to stick their head up above the parapet. And it takes a certain kind of person to be able to come in here and sit and do this and campaign, and not everybody's got that strength. I'm not saying they haven't got the strength, they might not have the strength at that time when they're dealing with their children. Hopefully in the future, when they realise how things have lined up in their life and where they are, they will have that strength to do something about it. But we are seeing so many people right now at this time don't understand the implications of this. And I think as far as teachers go, I have to say there's a fear factor. You don't go against your own employer.
Okay, that's an interesting point, thank you. Before I just ask Anne to come in with other questions, I mentioned before about the Manx Dyslexia Association. Do you work together, or are you both fighting two different battles, or is there a common aim of actually, as Peter said, around improving assessment, improving service, improving support? Can you just give us an oversight of why we have two groups at the moment representing on the island?
Yeah, okay. So there's two groups because the Manx Dyslexia Association and Dyslexia Advocacy Group, obviously we have the same shared goal. We both want education to be inclusive for all, but we're not a charity. We are an advocacy group, and put it another way, a pressure group. But we name it an advocacy group to be friendlier. The Manx Dyslexia Association are a charity, so they support families and children, and they signpost and they give advice. We can't give advice because we're not qualified professionals, so we can't simply do that, but what we can do is advocate. And the charity aren't able to advocate or be a pressure group because that's the outcome of their charity, that's like their contract that they're under. So we're not allowed to join and be partnerships. I have asked that question so that, again, that would have a bigger weight, but that is the barrier which stops us from doing that. We do have one member who is part of the Manx Dyslexia Association, the charity, who does help us, but she has very different hats depending on where she is. In fact, she's here today and very supportive, very valuable member of Dyslexia Advocacy Group, because she gives us knowledge and advice that perhaps we wouldn't have known without her. So that's how we do merge, but technically there's very different hats being worn. Yeah,
that's
You've got to remember as well, when you get charities, and you'll see this as MHKs in lots of different areas, when a charity sets up to do some good for a part of whatever part of society that they're looking at, sometimes when they've been going for years, they become embodied in the system. And I'm not saying that in a wrong or a bad way about the Manx Dyslexia Association. They're doing some really good work, but they're already in the system. And if they were to start putting pressure on like we're trying to do, there's every chance that they could lose funding or they could fall out of favour. They've got too much to lose. So it's because, but for as far as we're concerned, because that's the route that they're having to take, and that's the fine tightrope that they're walking, they're not going to solve the problem. They're only going to keep doing what they keep doing. We want to put ourselves out of business. We want to put the Manx Dyslexia Association out of business. We want to pressurise to move this forward, not just carry on doing what we've always been doing.
Okay, excellent. And do you want to ask?
Yeah, I've just got a few questions now around diagnosis and screening. And I'd like to ask you, what's your experience been of having a child assessed for dyslexia?
I'll sort of approach it in a slightly different method in that it's I still haven't been able to get my child diagnosed with dyslexia. This is a long journey. He's now in his 5th year of education. He's in year 4. And in that time, concerns have been raised from a very early age, I think even in sort of reception. There was some say, something's not quite gelling, we're not quite sure what it is, early days and all the rest of it. And that's sort of gone through. I'm just reading sort of some of my notes here, I think.
Do you want me to step in?
No. Each meeting with, parent-teachers meetings and whatnot, they've raised concerns. Dyslexia has been mentioned a couple of times. Quite well, nearly every time really. And the solution's always been that they need to refer them to CAMS. So that was agreed to do that in 2021. So the concerns were raised. When I sort of said, well, he is still quite young, is it the right time to refer to CAMS? I was assured that, that there was a huge waiting list. So definitely had to get our name in on it, which we did. After multiple referrals, I've got the sort of list from the school Senko, and also then requesting that I referred myself and that I get my GP to refer, because I hoped that was going to sort of push things forward. He finally sort of got an appointment with CAMS in November 2024. So that's very, very recently. So that's nearly 3 years in the making just to get that far. Now, because of my involvement with the group, and I wouldn't have known this if I hadn't seen something on social media and turned up to a meeting one day, I was advised that CAMS will have nothing to do with dyslexia, which I've then raised with the school on several occasions, but they've always been of the sort of notion that actually, CAMS will do that. It's not our place to diagnose dyslexia, but we're teachers, we'll take their guidance. Only recently have they sort of confirmed that yes, they are now aware, and I'm talking 3 or 4 teachers throughout the years have repeatedly said, no, CAMS is the answer. CAMS is the answer. Once we get there, all will come to light. And only recently they've sort of said, yes, they had heard that maybe it wasn't a CAMS thing. So finally managed to get a CAMS appointment, November 2024. On the 2nd of December, after a couple of consultations, they've come back with a diagnosis of attention deficient hyperactivity disorder, or ADHD, which we hear a lot about. And that was mainly because that's what they were assessing during that process. And in my conversations with the community mental health practitioner who we're meeting with, she sort of said, dyslexia probably is an issue. We can look into that. This was in the first consultation. But she'll have to look into it because she was quite new to our system. On the second consultation, she advised that actually they didn't have any remit to be able to do any dyslexia assessments, and therefore, because it was an education thing, the school would need to look into that. So it was back to square one. So we're talking sort of, partway through a 5-year journey here, constantly being told that CAMS is the answer, going back and saying, I don't think they are, and then finally getting to the point where they're not. I've then been advised, following this long process and a lot of fighting to get there, because I didn't feel the need that medication was required at the stage, which seems like quite an extreme process, and I've looked at the pros and cons. I don't think it's required. That they will be discharged from CAMS, as apparently the service is no longer required. That was the line. I said, well, can we not look at other avenues? And the simple response is constantly, well, if you don't want to look at medication, we can't provide you with a service. So I'm still in that situation now. Now, the school obviously has believed that he is dyslexic. They did a assessment, just quite a basic one thing that came back, I think that was in 2021, or maybe 22, that came back as saying highly likely as dyslexic, which kept prompting them to say, well, yes, we'll tell CAMS this. So they've done assessments within the school that they have access to. They're saying, yep, highly likely, this is what we think it is, go forth and get support from CAMS. That's not going to happen. I've been lucky enough to have an assessment done by a professional who hopes to soon have their ACP accreditation, who's confirmed that Xavier is presenting as dyslexic. At this point in time, I haven't gone down the route of funding private, consultation and travelling on and off island constantly to do so. But I guess that will be the next avenue, if I want to do that at this point in time in the Isle of Man.
But even if the assessment is undertaken, you'd want to make sure the support is there.
Well, the support would have to be. Because at the moment, I keep sort of hearing this needs-based policies that are in place and whatnot. And I suppose what I'm looking for is, how are those needs assessed? If we have no way of assessing if somebody is dyslexic or not on the island, how are those needs assessed in the first place? And then secondly, needs-based provisions. If in fact there is, I can get confirmation for a very lengthy and expensive process that there is a need, what's available, what will be available to meet those needs?
Just bear with us, Anne. We're going to come to you. We're just going to go to Dawn's question, but we will come to yours.
Anything to add on to that?
No, I was just...
Could you just clarify, just for the record, Renee, what you mean by ACP accreditation?
I believe that stands for Assessment Practicing Certification.
Okay, thank you.
Okay.
Which would then qualify them to officially make that diagnosis.
Okay.
I would just like to answer your question as well, because I've been through the same process that Renee's gone through, and then I have gone on to have the assessment professionally. So he started in junior school, and they just box tick send forms. They used the term educational psychologist and said they were referring him to there. I'd never heard this term before. He did get referred to CAMS, but that was by me through my GP. Dyslexia quite often goes hand in hand with other things. I felt he had Asperger's, which he did. But dyslexia was clearly there. I'm dyslexic. I've not been diagnosed, although I have now booked a professional diagnosis to give some weight to the fact that I keep telling people I'm dyslexic. So I'm getting that done. But we box tick send forms, and I really felt like they were supporting him. And then he moved to senior school, and after his first half term I got a report to say he was doing really well in every subject. It was brilliant, no concerns. What do you mean no concerns? He can't write, he can't read his own writing, he's really struggling with reading. There were some major concerns. So I got onto the school. The send forms hadn't even been passed on. That was just a box ticking exercise. So we went through what it might be. They did their informal assessment, which allows them to put some things in place, as Renee says, but I didn't feel it was enough. So I rang the educational psychologist to find out, when is he going to be seen? No, we don't see them. We've not had a referral, and we don't see them for dyslexia. So again, I followed CAMS. I rang them back. I said, you saw him for Asperger's. Will you see him for dyslexia? No, we don't do that. So then I had to reach out to the Manx Dyslexia Association and say, please help me. What do I do? And they're the ones that said you can get the professional assessment, and they referred me to somebody. Now, in the meantime, Ramsey Grammar School, Mr. Wilson from the SS&S unit was fabulous. I was so lucky to come across him. He was very supportive. He understood their informal assessment and what it would mean. But in doing some research from contacting the Manx Dyslexia Association, and as Peter says, there was a long history that you can look at, and the history said the school will put these things in place, but right before their exams they'll whip them all away from you because they don't want to apply to the exam board. So I thought, oh, hello here. So anyway, I got the assessment done. I paid for it. Got the professional assessment. Yes, he's dyslexic. Yes, he struggles in these areas. This is what he would be entitled to under the Equality Act. And, it should be informally reassessed as you go through to change his needs. He was assigned the use of a laptop. He was assigned the use of a scribe who writes for him. And at one point he had somebody who read things out to him. As we went through the school, the needs changed. They did their informal assessments, the needs changed. No need to use a scribe anymore, don't need a reader, do need a laptop. His handwriting is very poor, no one can read it, he can't read it himself, and he can't spell, so he needs a spell checker. So what do I get? The phone call right before mock exams. We have done another informal assessment and he's got better. There's no problems with him now, so we're taking away all of your stuff. Oh no, you've got the report. Doesn't know anything about the report. The report has been with the school for years. They don't know anything about it. So I send it to her again. She goes through it. She says, right, yeah, okay. So we'll send it to the exam board. Of course, the exam board agree. So now he gets it. So the major point there, though, is that they put these things in place to make us as parents feel comfortable. Now, if they had given him a laptop for 4 years and then right before his exams handed him a pen, he was actually at a substantial disadvantage from those who hadn't been given these provisions through school. It was absolutely outrageous.
Well, we've heard this from a number of people who've sort of, come to our meetings and whatnot. And that's a key concern. I mean, if there's a policy in place, then it should be in place. There's a number of parents who said that they've literally tried to take the laptop away weeks, sometimes on exam day.
Can I just ask for the record, really, for our sort of record? You mentioned about getting an assessment done privately. Can you just give us some sort of idea of the cost that you had to incur to actually do that assessment?
It was $475 when I paid for him. It's still $475 because I just paid for myself. We were lucky he was old enough. He was already 14, so we were able to do it with a remote session. If he'd been under 14 and not confident in speaking himself, we would have had to have taken him across. Now, bear in mind, they quite often suffer from other disorders. With Asperger's, does not like travelling, so that would have been a huge stress on him. And of course, financially, that would have cost a lot of money as well. I'm lucky I was able to afford it. $475 is not a cheap thing for parents to pay out for.
No, okay, thank you. Dawn?
Yeah, thanks, Annabel, for that. Can I just ask, in terms of the exam process, so when a child is coming up to the exam period and it is incumbent on the school to make an application for those adjustments. I understand that process. But can I just clarify, are they expecting a professional diagnosis in order to make those adjustments?
No, so they don't need a professional diagnosis. Their informal one throughout the school leads them down this path of applying for exam provisions. But the problem is, I don't think they have any faith in their process, and so they don't want to go to I feel they don't want to go to the exam board because they're not qualified to make these assessments, and so they don't want to back it up. So at the very end of the day, when they actually have to submit their evidence, they feel like their evidence isn't good enough and they just give up. And at that point, if you haven't got your professional diagnosis, all of that's just going to be taken away from you.
So can I ask you, have you ever heard the expression, what is their normal way of working in anticipation of doing the exams? Have you heard that expression before?
Yes, yeah, I've heard that.
As opposed to relying on a professional diagnosis. So I've come across this before, is where the schools are expected to understand what the child's normal way of working is in order to apply those adjustments to exams. So, and my understanding is that they don't need a professional diagnosis for that, but what you're saying is that the schools don't really understand how to assess that normal way of working in order to make the application.
Yeah, I understand. They've given him that normal way of working throughout this whole school. They know what it is, but it seems like they're not prepared to justify it, which actually they're required to do under the Equality Act. They are absolutely failing everyone at that point. It seems like they don't feel that they can justify it to an external body, which is their actual job. So when we have to pay for this other person. Now, imagine you don't find this out. The assessment, as you say, it takes all this long time. Even after
5 years into a journey, and that's lack of information from people providing that education.
And even though you've had your assessment now, you're still waiting for it because it does take a long while. You can't slot this in quickly because someone phones you and says, by the way, next week they're not having that laptop for their exams. It takes time. And so if they only tell you that in the 4th year, right before they're about to he took his maths GCSE at the final one, it just doesn't work. You're just disadvantaging children. They are failing under the Equality Act.
Right. Julia, we've got quite a lot of evidence from yourself, which we're really grateful for. I don't know if there's anything you want to add before we move on to the next question.
I suppose if I've already kind of submitted it in writing, I suppose if you wanted to save on time, I could move on to the next question.
Yeah, we are conscious of time, but let's say we are grateful for your submission, and it's really good that we had Annabel and we had Renee's submissions there, because I think it's grateful. Peter, anything you'd like to add?
A retrospective slant on this, going back to 2003 with my child. He had an educational psychologist in the department, and he did get a full assessment, and every child that presented with reading and writing was forwarded to the Department of Education's educational psychologists, where they were given an assessment, and they were also given a plan to take back to the school, and the educational psychologist used to go into the school to see if that plan was being followed. Since then, you can see now it's gone backwards. All that has gone. So in the last 20 years, things have actually got a lot worse. So we've gone from a situation in 2003 where dyslexia was recognised, pupils were being tested for it, plans were being made, given to schools, the educational psychologists going to school to see it's being followed up. All that's been withdrawn.
Well, that thing might lead on to the next question, actually.
Yeah. Can I ask you, you say in the petition that using the term literacy difficulties instead of dyslexia ignores other difficulties faced by people with dyslexia. Could you just explain that further to us?
Yeah, so for example, my daughter has sequencing difficulties, and it might not be so academic, but it affects her. So she loves dancing, but she cannot remember the dancing steps without having to do more repetition than most people. And so if she does dancing auditions, she comes across at first impression that she's not a very good dancer, when actually she's incredible if you just gave her longer to learn the routine. So that ignores, so that demonstrates this isn't just an educational problem, this is actually impacts hobbies and after-school curriculum activities as well. Into other things, it's, you know, if I gave my daughter lots of instructions, she will not remember all of the instructions. Sequencing affects her in maths. You know, if you're doing division, there's maybe 10 steps that you have to remember in order to get to the answer. She can't remember those 10 steps in order, or she can, but it will take her much more effort than normal. Her poor working memory. So if she's got to remember a number in her head in order to use the number to divide it with, she can't remember that. So she will need to write that number down in order to then do the maths. It would affect her in, you know, other, so it's literacy difficulties. All the other things are all literacy, so fluency, comprehension, you know, reading, decoding, rhyming. I guess they all do fit into the bracket of literacy skills.
Organisational skills?
Yeah.
That's one that sort of seems to come through, which obviously has an impact on education as well. If you're finding it hard to organise your thoughts or whatnot, that's been raised on quite a few sort of papers on dyslexia and some of the symptoms.
There's one current one. It's been current ever since I've been involved in this. And a teacher at the end of a lesson will write down the homework on the board. And for dyslexic, to be able to read that and write it down, it's nigh on impossible, especially in the time given as they're moving out of the classroom. They cannot retain what they've read and then convert it to something that they can write down. And the number of children that are being disciplined, putting detention for not doing the homework, and it's not that they can't do the homework, it's not that they're not doing their homework, it's not that they're taking part in having a massive effort to keep up with everybody else. The fact that they cannot read and write it and put it down, if the teachers were to give that as a handout, that homework will be going home with them. But there's lots of children in that class will benefit from that kind of system. So again, it's the perception of the teachers not understanding how neurodiversity works. So if they can't get the information down to take home with them, they forgot about it when they do get home, it's not being done, and straight away they're then in conflict with the teacher. You haven't done your homework, you have to be punished. So children being punished for something they cannot do, and that to me is unacceptable. You should not be punishing children for something that they cannot do and expect them to do that. And that's increasingly as relevant today as it was with my children. And the number of battles when I went into school to withdraw my children from detention after that had happened, and when you speak to the teacher and say, why did you write it down on the board? Why couldn't you give them a slip of paper with it on? And they said, well, why should I treat them different? Well, why don't you do it for everybody? Well, why should I? Because he's dyslexic, he can't do it. Oh, I didn't know he's dyslexic.
Yeah, my daughter has been given detention for forgetting her PE kit, and she's regularly losing her bus card, her I can't remember what it's called now, the lanyard, the PE kit, and you know, at home we try all sorts of strategies. You know, we have a phone and we have Google calendars, and reminders pop up on what she's needed. We've tried boards in her bedroom in terms of exactly what equipment she needs, and it is getting better with those techniques, but it's from me at home kind of giving her those tools. When she did get to detention, I did email the school and I said, a detention on its own isn't going to help this symptom. It's like, when she is having a detention, could you perhaps go over some strategies in order to overcome this problem, like highlighting what you're going to need, a timetable, put it in your diary, and so on. I didn't get an email back in response to that.
Can I just...
Anna, before you come in, I'm just going to come back on Peter's point, and then I'm going to let Dawn come in, then I'll let you come in, Anna. It's just that this does open up this wider discussion around the word dyslexia. And we know that from the reports from the department they want to use learning difficulties or something else. Is it the fact there is this fear around using the word, possibly labelling children with dyslexia? Would you think things would improve if we were not embarrassed or ashamed to use the word dyslexia? And I'm saying that from somebody who is slightly dyslexic and came through school and has some of these problems you've highlighted today. If we were more open and transparent with the word dyslexia and what the benefits are and the support mechanism around it, would that make it easier for students, do you think?
The very sad thing about this is that saying dyslexia, we need to educate everybody about it, and the main people that need educating are teachers. They don't understand it and they're frightened of it because they don't understand it.
And that came out in the research paper, yeah.
And when we've done a freedom of information, how much training they've done on dyslexia on the Isle of Man and teachers, it's zero. So they don't understand it. Now, I'm dyslexic. I didn't find out I was dyslexic until I was 48. And it had a profound effect on me at that time. And I had to have some serious counselling. It still gets me now. Before I knew, it was a curse. Once I knew and I could understand it, it's a blessing, it's a gift. And that's what we've got to get over. So when we're saying we want to get away from the word dyslexia, no, we don't. If you look now at GCHQ, they want to recruit people with neurodiversity, people that are dyslexic. You look at the police, even on the island, the police have a policy that if you can apply to be a police constable if you're dyslexic. They need to know that you're dyslexic so that they can give you the right interview and the right exam process to go through for you to be able to process. Because people, our society recognise now that neurodiversity isn't a curse, it's a gift. The one people that are trying to hide it and get rid of the name is the Department of Education. And I've got to say it, hand on heart, they don't want it because it's going to cost them money and they don't want to spend it.
Well, we will put those questions to the department. Do you want to come in briefly and then I'll ask Dawn to ask a question?
Oh, I wasn't going to be brief. Do you want to ask me a question? It's up to you.
Let's bring.
Because mine's just relevant to
Okay, let's bring your question.
Peter, you were just talking about back in 2003 and things being written on the board, and you know the child not being able to comprehend that or write it down, and then being penalised for it. Do you think just in the time since then, where the use of digital is more prevalent, particularly in secondary school, and the use of technology such as Google Classroom, which is quite common, do you think that is supporting students with dyslexia now, or do you think there's still the same disadvantage?
So if people are using technology, whether that's an advantage for people with dyslexia. Yeah. Okay. So overall, the research would say that it gives people with dyslexia an advantage. That's what the literature and research is saying. Personally, for my daughter, I can speak for her personally, is she really struggles to understand robotic voices. So even if someone gives her like really good quality assistive technology, if it's a robotic voice, she cannot understand it. She has the same comprehension difficulties as she would when she was reading. So for us, it hasn't been particularly useful in that respect because we need really good quality software that has more natural voices. And for example, if you give her an audiobook and it's in a natural human voice, she really enjoys that and she can do really well. It's been shown actually she did really well in one of her.
I think maybe where I was coming from there,
yes.
Is where the instructions for homework, instead of being written on a board and the student having to try and write that down, if the instructions are on digital, if the instructions are in a digital format and the student's able to, you know, maybe with difficulty read those instructions, but maybe with a bit of support at home. Would that be supportive to a student and would
if it was in audio
create less disadvantage?
Yes, if it was in audio, then absolutely it would be definitely an advantage. Yes, overall. I mean, even if it was robotic voices, it would still be, I think, probably better than written. But if you could somehow make the voices more natural, or someone really talking into a device, then yes, it would be really advantageous.
An audio
exactly.
Instruction as opposed to written instruction.
Exactly, because
Thank you.
Peter, do you want to come briefly, and then I know Anne's got a question.
I think the improvement in technology over the last 20 years has had a profound impact. That's why companies are looking for people with neurodiversity, because they know they've got an iPad there that they can do everything they want. They can send emails, and it doesn't matter that they can't write, they can't spell, they can do all that. The problem that we've got is within the school system is they want people to sit down and pass an exam with a fountain pen, like it's been done for the last 100 years. The education system isn't keeping up with technology, and for dyslexic pupils to take advantage of that technology, the department has to start using that technology. And I don't think at the moment they're very keen on paying for some of this software that they can dish out to their kids, to the pupils. What scares me with this approach, that they've got to sit down and write this exam with the same pen as it's been done for the last 100 years. We've got AI coming, and everybody knows that the implication of that. If we haven't got a Department of Education that can recognise what technology and using technology is about to help our pupils, everybody reach their full potential, we're going to get left behind on the island in our education system. We're going to go back to the Stone Age compared to other people.
Okay, thank you.
Am I able to comment on just
very
that?
briefly, because I want to bring Anne in.
My only comment there was I was recently reading an article where it was talking about sort of, as AI progresses and it's taking over a lot of these things, there was a thing that neurodiverse and, particularly sort of dyslexic thinking and a few of the others is actually going to become more vital. I think they've recently opened up a university which is all around sort of dyslexic thinking, how that opens. So when you start taking that sort of linear approach of being able to read and write neatly away, which AI will do, it's more of sort of those diverse thoughts and being able to see big picture and whatnot that's going to become more valuable. So it was a really interesting article sort of saying how that notion of what is intelligence is going to change with AI progressing.
Okay, thank you.
Just listening to your answers there, I mean, the impression, what you're telling me is that dyslexia is about more than words, that there is a much broader definition of that. And, do you believe that, that needs to be more understood and more awareness of that broader definition is required?
Do you mind if I come in? Okay, yeah. So I wanted to get back to your question. Firstly, Dawn, she asked about the laptops. My son uses a laptop that I provided. It's absolutely amazing. Teachers still hand him paper, but if they emailed him everything, life would be so much easier for him. In your question, though, yes, they must continue to use the word dyslexia because dyslexia is a specific learning disability. It is neurological rather than psychological, and it doesn't cover things like lacking in education or home life or environment or anything like that, which other people could have literacy difficulties in. Now, dyslexia is defined under the law. Now, the Department of Education would have you believe in their 2016 review thing that it's not useful to use the word dyslexia, and it's complete nonsense. It is in the Equality Act. It is mentioned in the notes from the Equality Act. The word dyslexia is actually mentioned, and the criteria for dyslexia is met under the Equality Act. But even so, in the guidance notes, they use the word dyslexia because it covers so many more things than literacy difficulties. It is about thinking differently, and which is why, as Peter said, GCHQ are looking for people like that. It is completely different, and it's defined in law. And to group it together, now I know where this has come from, because this has come from this, what I would describe as complete and utter, if I try not to swear, nonsense from the desk in 2016, how to support children with literacy difficulties in school. It was a consultation that went out. It is utter nonsense. It says here, a diagnosis of dyslexia is not recognised by the exam boards and will not provide you with additional support. Nonsense. Some of the assessments used by professionals as part of the diagnostic process may support exam diagnosis. Contradicted yourself, and yes, it does. It goes on to say that the use of the word dyslexia is not helpful anymore because it's been grouped together too much. So you've been told don't use dyslexia because you're bandying it around. So then you bring out another policy that says, right, the problem there was clearly the word. Let's get rid of the word and call it literacy difficulties. No, the problem with it is dyslexia is a specific learning disability. It has its own things. It is very separate from literacy difficulties. And when you bandy them together, you're not meeting your requirements under the Equality Act.
Annabel, can I possibly ask for a copy of that document?
I will send it to you. I have, I'm
If
happy
you
to
could
say, I
send
have
it-
the Equality Act with the highlighted sections. I have the consultation, and I've only, I'm dyslexic, I've only printed out the sections that are relevant. I also have the Equality Act explanatory notes, which says why dyslexia is met under that. And I also have, I would like to say here, the new policy from DESC, the IEP. Now, I would like to say that I had reason to look at Hansard, and I don't normally, and I'm not a big reader, but at Hansard on the 20th of November, I stumbled across Mrs. Kane introducing the inclusive education policy, which was a surprise to me. I have a child in school, with these disabilities. You would think that this would be relevant. But no, she introduced it there. Mr. Hooper must be commended because he goes on to say he wasn't aware of it. Mrs. Geddes, you went on to say that you weren't aware of it and you're criticising it, and you should criticise it because the only useful thing that comes out of their new policy is the fact that they acknowledge they have to meet the law. But then they don't meet the law. They go on to smoke and mirrors waffle, nothing about dyslexia, nothing about its a specific learning disability, and there is actually no measurable actions in their policy. I can only imagine it's a framework. It's nonsense, it needs binning.
Annabel, if I
finished.
could...
You have digital copies of these? That you
I
can-
will email them to you.
If I could just ask very politely, if you could just send me copies of those,
I
please.
will do.
Okay, I know you're very passionate about this, but we would like to obtain that evidence. Do you have any questions before we move on?
No, that's fine.
Okay, well,
No, actually, I think we can do that.
okay,
Time, so-
let's move on to your question then. Don. Yeah.
So I just want to move on to interventions and support. So in your petition, you suggest that every school should explicitly teach the rules and patterns of reading and spelling and explicitly teach the 6-syllable patterns that decipher whether the vowel is short or long. Could you just elaborate a bit on that for me, please?
Yeah, okay. So I might not be able to know, I don't know every single rule now at the tip of my tongue, but the rules of spelling has been so useful to help my daughter to read. I'm convinced that if I didn't teach her the rules of spelling, she wouldn't be able to read. And I can't remember that specific rule, but I'll share with you a rule that I can remember at the tip of my tongue is, for example, you need to know if a word has one S or two S's at the end. So, for example, was only has one and loss only has two, and because of the vowel sound before it. So if the vowel sound is short, as in a, e, I, then it will always have two S's, apart from if it belongs in the yes frame, which is yes, this, bus, plus, gas. So this is the rule I know at the moment very well because I'm teaching it to my 5-year-old son. And so he knows the yes frame, and so he knows it only has one S. But in contrast to moss, floss, pass, then he knows it has two S's because it has a short vowel sound. And there are so many rules like this. And children with dyslexia are intelligent. So, our range of IQ is from low to high. So there are some people with dyslexia who can be just as intelligent. So if reading is difficult to learn, then perhaps they can learn it in a different way, which is through learning the rules of spelling and reading. And all children can learn in that way, whether you have dyslexia or not. It's irrelevant. So if they teach everyone the rules of spelling from the very beginning, then all children will be able to learn, whether you're dyslexic or not.
Just to elaborate a bit further on that, how does that compare to how it's delivered now?
To my knowledge, the Isle of Man do not offer the rules of spelling at all. So I felt like it was my responsibility to teach my children to read, and I do that by teaching the rules of spelling. So I don't do it in a traditional way that other parents do, which is kind of reading books, or these random books that they sent home. Because for me, it's kind of like learning the dictionary. And so if you learn one rule, like the one I shared with you today, it now means that's taught you how to read and spell hundreds of words just by you knowing one rule. So you might have to learn 100 rules, but that opens you up to the dictionary rather than learning every single word in the dictionary individually.
Okay, thank you. In your petition, you also suggest there's a lack of consistency in the way that schools across the island provide support for children with learning difficulties or learning differences. Can you provide us with some examples of that?
I can provide you one that happened yesterday. So my daughter started a new school yesterday, which was not because of her SEND needs weren't being met. It was rather because of actually bullying and isolation. And I was informed by the deputy head of that school that I didn't need to sign a SEND register. I think it might have, I'm not 100% sure on this, but I think it might have been because either they didn't have one or that she didn't meet the criteria. I'm not too sure. I didn't push too much because I needed my daughter to feel settled.
And so at the school that she'd come from, you'd signed the SEND register?
She was on the SEND register. The other difference was I then asked, what about an IEP plan, which is an individual education plan? I was told that my daughter didn't meet the criteria for an IEP plan when she's always had an IEP plan in place and she's always been on the SEND register. And I did make a comment. I said, it's unusual to come to that conclusion based on no assessments. They hadn't assessed her at all. And they told me it was based on the email that I sent them with some documentations. I didn't say this because I needed my daughter to feel comfortable on her first day and it wasn't the right time or place to push the SEN. But the email that I sent them was her diagnostic reports, which confirmed she had dyslexia, which means that she is significantly worse off in terms of learning compared to other people her age. I also showed them her existing IEP plan, which came from the previous school, which was quite comprehensive. It involved sometimes having a reader in exams. If not a reader, it would have been a computer reader, 25% extra in exams. And so, one school, the day before, she was entitled to an IEP plan and she was on the SEN register. The next day, suddenly she doesn't meet the criteria, which demonstrates inconsistencies between schools and probably within schools, because there's bound to be a child who perhaps is not as worse off than my daughter is, and they are given that. Yeah.
Can I just jump in before you ask this question? Just for those listening online that's not familiar with a SEN is a special educational needs register, correct?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Dawn?
So I just, I've listened to you all talking about the lack of support that you've had, whether that's in primary or secondary education. Do you feel there is more support available at primary versus secondary or the other way round? Or do you feel that it's almost like a potluck situation, that if you fall upon a teacher who is more supportive or more interested?
It's definitely potluck. Yeah, and in junior school though, I felt my son was being helped. There were SEND forms. I felt, oh great, this is great. And then you go to senior school, it's not even passed on. They were just getting him through the system and ticking the right forms and moving him on. So,
And you don't realise that at the time.
No, you don't know that at the time. So you don't know.
It feels very important.
Yeah, and it was just nonsense.
It's interesting, I think, in my last meeting with the school SENCO, so that Special Education Needs Coordinator, she actually said, and she was trying to explain, she said, he's such a bright individual and, he's got so many great ideas and so articulate and the rest of it. She literally then turned around and said, I just fear for him if we don't get something sorted by the time he gets to secondary school. She said that she said it came out, she said, I fear. She said that the support that he's getting now, and he's able to get now, and the concessions, he won't have at secondary school.
That leads me into my next question, actually, which would be good if each of you could contribute. So in relation to the 4Ds, what additional support would you like to see for these conditions specifically?
Okay. So I suppose I did kind of create a wish list, if you like, which is on the first page. So obviously the biggest thing for us would be, having an additional educational needs code of practice, so making the Education Amendment Bill more comprehensive so that it can support an AEN code of practice, because it's my understanding that Act as it stands currently doesn't allow it to happen. I think it would be really useful to be able to have teachers to have training in dyslexia. That would be fundamental, and for parents and children to be given information about dyslexia, because at the very beginning when I suspected it and she was finally diagnosed, you just feel lost. You feel completely alone. You have to find it all out yourself. You feel like 100% responsible to do everything. So having like an information pack, and also what support, good quality technology, and not just for the next, I do believe there might be something coming for a 5-year license, but making sure that sticks that way, because I do know that there was something called Kurzweil about 10 years ago that was funded and then dropped, so I just don't want the same thing happening this time round. I think it would be really helpful to almost do like a campaign, like if you say, could my child be dyslexia, that the teachers must do a universal screening tool, almost like the campaign of could I have sepsis, kind of like that.
Can I just jump in on that point, because I think it's very relevant. When I was preparing myself for this session, I came across a piece of legislation that was going through the House of Commons in 2022, and I don't know if your group is aware of this, but it was called the Dyslexia Screening and Teacher Training Bill. It's a very short bill, but what I thought was fascinating about this bill was the fact that within this bill there was a provision that basically says, it's a very, very small bill, but it basically says the provision for screening of all children for dyslexia before the end of year 1 in primary school. I won't put words in your mouth, but do you have any views on that particular bill? You know, as a group, would you support it, or do you think it's too much? Because you've highlighted your code of practice, teacher training, information for parents, good quality technology. What's your thoughts on that bill, the draft bill?
Okay, yes, it's a good bill to have a universal dyslexia screening. That's what Gibraltar are doing currently. Gibraltar screen all children, and I think they do more than that. They will screen all children, whether it be in reception or year 1, I'm not sure.
Stages, isn't it?
And they will repeat it every 2 or every 3 years until they get to a certain age, so that no child is lost. Gibraltar are in the middle of trying to get every school on their island to be dyslexia friendly, accredited with the British Dyslexia Association quality marker. So in terms of a wish list, obviously that would be the golden standard, wouldn't it?
Okay, thank you. I think it was Dawn who's asked the question, but I think it was an open question Dawn asked. I don't know if anyone else wanted to come in there or anything else you want to ask.
Do you think that Julia covered the wish list there, or is there anything else you want to add to that list?
I think there is. That's the gold standard where we want to go. And I think we've got to look, that's at the top end. At the bottom end, we've got to stop punishing kids for being dyslexic.
Yeah.
As you said, it's more training as well. I think at the moment, and it does feel a little bit like smoke and mirrors, because I think there's a lot of people out there who want to provide the support. It's not through lack of want, but how can you be insisting that schools put support mechanisms in place with individuals who don't have the knowledge to be able to do that? I'll be really, really brief. I think like a really contrasting sort of situation that I was made aware of. I've got a friend whose son was in mainstream education. He's dyslexic. He's more or less been told that he wouldn't be, nicely, but, GCSEs probably aren't for him. It's not going to be achievable. He's not going to be able to retain these. They were fortunate that they're quite wealthy sort of grandparents who were able to fund education with King William's College. Now, apparently they have specialists there who do know the right teaching mechanisms and everything else, and they've just qualified now with some really solid GCSEs. Now, we're talking about a change of only over a year or two, but it just goes to show that there is systems and processes in place that can, vastly change a whole outcome of somebody's life. But obviously, if you don't have the funds to do that, you're not going to get that assistance.
Can I just say as well, under the European Court of Human Rights, guidance for schools in England, reasonable adjustments for disabled children, which is referenced in the Equality Act that the desk have to follow, it does in fact say in here that there are adjustments that are reasonable for dyslexia pupils, such as pen, grips, adaptive PE equipment. It lists some stuff, and it says here that many reasonable adjustments are inexpensive. And so we're not asking for a lot of funding. There doesn't need to be some sensationalist headline saying, £1 million to support dyslexia. No, some of this is just simple basic stuff. But I would also like to say that this ECHR does say the crux of reasonable adjustments duty is not whether something is an auxiliary provision or whether it's an adjustment to practice. It's not possible for a school to justify a failure to make a reasonable adjustment. The question is only whether the adjustment is reasonable. And this is the problem we're having, is if they don't screen and they don't know whether you need adjustments, then they can just deny they didn't need to do any adjustments because you were all just mainstream.
Okay, I'm conscious of time. Dawn, have you got anything else before I move on to another question?
feel
Okay, you okay, Anya?
Yeah.
Okay, I'll move on to just the final question because I want to give you time to sum up and to give any additional information you want. So, but one thing, just to highlight, which I think goes on very nicely, follows on very nicely from your comments there, Annabel, and this is in relation to the Freedom of Information request that you provided, which was cited in your petition, and it found that 60% of staff and teachers were not confident in supporting students with dyslexia. How do you think what would you like to see changed in order to give the teachers the confidence to be able to support not just students but also parents? I'd welcome your views on that if possible.
Okay. I mean, in terms of giving teachers the confidence to be able to come forward, is, from my perspective, I'd be really pleased. It demonstrates that the teacher is taking the time to be concerned and try and meet my child's needs. When I have had a phone call off the teacher with some concerns, that I've been really grateful and appreciative towards that teacher, and I've done that intentionally to try and reinforce that behaviour of being able to do that again, whether that to be to me or to another parent. And I think perhaps trying to get the public involved so that knowledge becomes more widespread, that as a whole parents would be pleased for this.
Do you think the early assessment of all primary school children would actually help that process?
You need the evidence to prove what it is that what we're saying, and until you get screening, you're not going to get that evidence. You need to count the numbers of kids that we're talking about. We can't do that. We can only talk about our own children and what we're facing. What the department should be doing is they should be saying, how big is this problem? And the only way you're going to find out how big this problem is to start screening. And you're going to screen all the children. That will tell you then how many children and how big the problem is. If you're going to deny the word dyslexia, if you're going to deny any screening, if you're not going to get educational psychologists looking at these children and coming up with the actual numbers, all we're doing is, it's an ostrich syndrome. We're just burying your head in the sand and the problem's going away. So we have to start screening to find out how big a problem this is. And it's only once you find out how big the problem is that you're going to start looking at what the answers are. And the answer, like we've just said, isn't big budgets. Some of the small changes that you can make in classrooms by educating the teachers, they can have such a profound effect on all the other children, all the other pupils in that classroom. That's been repeated so many times when they've done this at any school that's become dyslexic friendly. They've seen a rise in standards in everybody. It's not just the 10 to 20% that are dyslexic, but we've got to find that 10 to 20% of our pupils to know what the problem is, and just burying your head in the sand isn't doing anything. We have to be proactive.
I think what also would help teachers is if they knew what to do with the information. It's no good to tell a parent that we think your child is struggling with X, Y, and Z, and then not being able to offer a solution on how to meet that needs. So I think if teachers knew how to meet needs and knew what resources they had, and they had the staffing and the budget and resources to be able to meet needs, then they more than likely have more confidence in sharing it too. Because there can't be anything worse than sharing a concern and saying, I'm sorry, there's nothing I can do about it there.
What's happening now?
A lot of these problems that you're perceiving that we've got, back in 2003, the educational psychologists came out for an all-island plan for all the schools to deal with dyslexia. That plan is still relevant today, and it'll still be on the shelf in the Department of Education somewhere, gathering dust. The work's been done.
Okay, we'll try and obtain a copy of that as well. Thank you, Peter. And did you want to come in on a question?
Just a quick one, really. How difficult is that screening process? You know, it's quite expensive at £450, and you said that was an online process, but how complex is that process? Is it a process that you could put every child in before year one into simply in order to identify dyslexia?
Well, a formal diagnosis is different. You know, that costs a lot of money, and I wouldn't recommend everyone simply doing that. That would be too much. It would be excessive, not proportionate.
So is there something simplified that could be introduced at some point that would at least filter?
Yes, there are screening tools that tell you you're at risk of dyslexia. So, for example, my daughter did a Nessie screening, which is a publisher, not from a professional body, it's a publisher. But that told Nessie said that she was at high risk of having dyslexia. For me, that screening tool wasn't useful because they only did it after she already got a diagnosis of dyslexia. So I needed it to be the other way around when I suggested it 2 or 3 years earlier. But that is a tool that could be done, which I don't think would cost a lot of money to do. But it would give people an indicator of whether they're at risk of having dyslexia.
I think they do it because that's how they reassessed that my child wasn't dyslexic anymore. So they do have a tool and they do some assessments. They just don't use it well.
And I believe it was Nessie that's been used with Xavier at school as well, where they came up with the high propensity.
Okay. If you've got a teacher that's got a class of 25, 30 in front of them, and
35.
you've got one child there, 2 children there, they're really struggling reading and writing, but in every other aspect of what they're doing, they're at the lead and they're at the front. Educate the teachers to what dyslexia is. They're just going to say they stick out like a sore thumb. We've got to test them. So it's not like we've got to start something, a blank sheet of paper, and then everybody start this.
Yeah, do you think that would still, though, leave it open to being a hit and miss thing, whereas a screening process is a very definite thing that, you know, it either filters you out or possibly puts you into a category?
There's 2 things on that. Is when Gibraltar are doing it, they do it at different stages, but that's a safeguarding thing that they're doing it. But in the main, when they're doing it, it's the teachers, because they've been trained, will be spotting it. Now, if you get one teacher who doesn't spot it 1 year, the next year when they move class and they get a new classroom teacher, the next one will. And that will be some of the little idiosyncrasies between, because once you've met one dyslexic, you've met one dyslexic. We're not all the same. So there are some areas where somebody might just slip through. But if you've got the whole process from beginning of school going right up to leaving school, and the more that the teachers are tuned into this, they're going to be picking it up. They'll be picking up the ones that need the screening, not let's screen everybody to find them.
I think one of the problems we do have, though, is senior school, they're not changing teachers. My son has had the same English teacher all the way through, the same English teacher that refused to respond to me for years and has only just responded to me and told me it's a privilege to aim for the pass grade, and that prior to his dyslexic assessment he was already assessed and he was aiming for a D, which is a fail. But they didn't repeat that process once he'd been dyslexic with his provisions in place. The whole system is flawed.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, please do. Then we'll ask them some more.
Because your petition makes reference to the Equality Act, and you clearly, Annabel, you talked about that today. You've talked about how if there's not a diagnosis that the school, or don't screen, that the school wouldn't make those reasonable adjustments. I just kind of want to take a bit more of an objective look at the Equality Act. So the Equality Act requires schools and the department to provide certain information, accessibility statements and accessibility policy. Do you think that is being complied with by every school and by the department? And in doing so, do you think that schools understand their obligations under the Equality Act?
Can I answer this question?
Yeah.
So I had a meeting yesterday with the deputy head teacher of my daughter's school, and I was informed yesterday that since the Equality Act has come out, there's been more need to notice SEN, special educational needs, because of what that Equality Act has done. It's not saying that there's more people out there with SEN needs, it's just that it's become more highlighted. But I was also told that unfortunately the Equality Act didn't come with extra staffing, it didn't come with any more budget. I would argue that it hasn't also come out with any more additional training, but that's not what I was told yesterday. And because of that, he strongly implied that they are unable to fulfil the Equality Act. And that was given to me yesterday by a deputy head teacher.
And Julia, when the group were looking at various schools on the island and trying to find their various sort of documentation and whatnot, we struggled to come across. Remember, there was quite a few schools that we couldn't find their policies, or they weren't published. There seemed to be a need to sort of publish policies and whatnot as part of that act. But certainly there was quite a few that we couldn't find.
What-
So I'd say it was inconsistent based on that.
I think what Renee's referring to is that in a previous school that my daughter went to, I was looking for their SEN policy, and on their SEN policy it mentioned educational healthcare plans, EHCPs, and I knew this wasn't available on the Isle of Man, but I kind of emailed the school saying, could my daughter have an EHCP plan according to your own policy?
I think you've covered that in your written evidence,
Yes.
Julia. So,
Yeah, okay.
Can I just...
Just on that point, the point is that there's no consequences for not complying with the Equalities Act. And because there's no consequences, it's going to carry on doing it. Because if somebody does make a complaint, it's either swept under the carpet or it's hidden somewhere. It's not brought out. If somebody manages to go to court and win the case,
Yeah.
Which happened.
Which happened.
and it's happened a lot in my time, that one child will get what they need, but that isn't then disseminated right across the education system. But to me, to break the Equalities Act, you're breaking the law, but there's no consequences. So it's just going to carry on doing. If it was proven that they broke the Equalities Act and there was a fine and it cost them money, and it costs them lots of money and reputation, they will be, the other aspect of this will turn round, because it will be cheaper to educate our kids than it will be to go through that process. And until we have that process of people being made accountable for making these decisions, nothing's going to change.
We had a member of someone who came to our groups who told us that they went to a tribunal to fight for their son, and that person won their case.
So I think actually that's a good point that you're raising, is particularly when it comes to education, is that there's the consequences for breaches of the Equality Act don't result in any financial accountability. So what you're suggesting is that if there was more financial accountability as one of the penalties under the Act, you feel that there would be more teeth, effectively, more compliance with it. Is that what you're suggesting?
Sure, yeah.
Okay, thank you for that.
Thank you. Okay, I'm conscious of time. I will try and bring this hearing to a closure, but I want to give our guests an opportunity to add anything else they wish to share. So over to you, Renee, if there's anything you want to add, and we'll go through the panel, and then I'll bring the meeting to a close.
No, I think I've, made most of my points, but it very much is, we were talking before about what teachers may need and to feel more comfortable about diagnosing dyslexia or discussing it with parents. And I think it really is just knowledge and training and whatnot. And, it's how that's achieved, I'm not 100% sure. You've got a class of 35 students with various different needs. Can that be achieved? I'd like to think so. And I think from a lot of the documentation we've read, training in that area would help all students. So it's very much having the skills that when you are bringing your concerns to a parent, you can offer some solutions. Because having sat on this side and watching teachers discuss this with me, I can imagine it's quite distressing for them to have to say, look, we've got some serious concerns here, don't know what we're going to do about it. Sorry, hopefully somebody else can help you. And that can't be a nice experience for a teacher to do. So if we can empower them to be able to offer solutions, that'd be a huge step.
Excellent, thank you. Annabel?
I think, as Renee says, it really is, it comes down to training, and training has been promised throughout the years, and wasting money on consultations to tell you the same thing that was happening in 2003. It's been 20 odd years, the same things, the same patterns are being repeated. So now we banded around the term dyslexia too much, so we get rid of that, so now we're calling it literacy difficult. It's not solving the actual problems. These are just smoke and mirrors on top. We need there is no actionable things that they can be held accountable for in any of their policies. They're just policies to do better. Yeah, but how do we measure that? We need to actually measure it so that they're held accountable, so that they can actually help our students. I mean, it's too late for my son, I've accepted that, but for other people coming up, they need to have this consistency from all the teachers across all the boards so you can get it everywhere. And I think the problem is that it's from top down. You know, they're just banding everything together with too much. Their policies are nonsense and they're just not meeting their requirements. But as Peter says, there's no consequences to them. But really, all their acts and all their policies should have measurable things. They don't need to public consult. You don't need to do a public consultant. There'll be parents in your school that are telling you it's not working in every school because dyslexia is widespread. So why do we do a public consultation? We don't need that. What we need is some measures and some lessons learned. Where are the lessons learnt from the 2012 dyslexia policy? They've removed it, but they've not said what they learnt from it and how they've adapted it. They've created a new policy. From top down, it's not working. And as Renee says, right down to the teachers, they might want to help, but they don't feel empowered to help because there's just nothing they can do at this point.
Okay, thank you so much, Annabel. Julia?
From my perspective, I would say that it's been a really exhausting, tiresome process. Nothing is being given to you on a plate that your child deserves. You have to be the proactive person and make it happen by constantly emailing, constantly phoning, making so many complaints to make it happen. And then you just get somewhere, and then the unfortunate positions that we've been in, we've had to move schools, and then you start from scratch, which is where I'm starting from scratch all over again, to the point where my child's not even entitled to be on the SEN register or an IEP plan, when before she had a quite comprehensive one because of the complete battles that I had. So I would describe it as a battle. And desks say that they are a needs-led service, and then they don't want to use the term dyslexia. If I was to be honest, if my daughter's needs were met, I would be quite happy that they don't want to label it as dyslexia. That's not to say that I wouldn't use it at home. That's not to say that I wouldn't still get a diagnosis and explain this is why you're struggling. But if they met her needs, I wouldn't be here right now. I wouldn't be just advocating, we want a dyslexia diagnosis, because I say, do you know what? Your needs are being met. I'm here because her needs are not being met.
Okay, thank you. Peter?
I think I have 2 points to make. One point is, in the last 20 years, how much has the department learned, the Department of Education, and unfortunately you look at 20 years experience, they've got one experience 20 times and they're not the same, and that is going to carry on into the future if somebody doesn't stand up and stop this. The other point that I want to make is on a broader term for people that don't quite get what dyslexia is about. I was in the chamber when the debate was going on to get this select committee, and it's on Hansard, and there was an exchange between Bill Henderson and the Attorney General, and some people need to listen to that again because that just about sums up what dyslexia is for lots of people. Bill Henderson had been explaining that he'd been in consultation with the Attorney General for quite a few occasions about the word Parliament and on the papers, and the Attorney General stood up and he said, yeah, we've had these conversations, but it's quite simple, it's quite plain, it's as it is, and it doesn't need changing, it doesn't need any alteration. So you've got two very intelligent people who are at the pinnacle of our government, and you have a white piece of paper and somebody with a pen can do some lines and some curves, hold it up to one person, that's absolutely perfect and it's fine. You hold it up to another person and it says, no, it doesn't quite mean that to me. So the answer about dyslexia, it's not if you're dyslexic, if you're not, but it's when you're reading this and you're getting this information back off these pieces of paper, does it mean the same to both? And it doesn't.
Okay, thank you. On behalf of the committee, can I thank all of you for coming in today and for sharing your own concerns in respect of dyslexia. The committee now will sit in private. Thank you.